A sheriff's betrayal, a brutal desert, and an unlikely alliance. But what they discover on their journey will change everything. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The scorching sun of the Mojave Desert beat down mercilessly on Sarah Cooper as she sat alone on the parched earth, her cotton dress clinging to her skin with sweat. Her throat was dry, and her lips had already begun to crack from dehydration. The distant mountains shimmered in the heat, seemingly unreachable. The vast emptiness around her was broken only by scattered sagebrush and the occasional cactus, standing tall against the harsh landscape. Just hours ago, her husband, Sheriff William Cooper of Willow Creek, had driven her out here in their wagon, miles from any settlement. His cold eyes had shown no remorse as he pushed her out onto the sand. "This is where you belong," he had said, his voice as dry as the desert itself. "Spreading those rumors about me in town. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "They weren't rumors, William," Sarah had protested, her voice trembling. "I saw what you did to that Comanche family. Taking bribes, letting innocent people suffer." The sharp sting of his hand across her face had silenced her. "Nobody will believe the word of a woman over mine. And now, nobody will hear you at all." Sarah touched her bruised cheek at the memory, watching as William's wagon disappeared into the distance, leaving only a trail of dust in its wake. She had been married to him for 3 years, and for 3 years, she had witnessed his corruption grow. When she discovered he had framed a Comanche family for theft to cover his own crimes, she had made the mistake of confronting him. Now as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah knew she needed to move. Staying still meant certain death in the Mojave. With no water, no food, and no shelter, her chances of survival were slim. But Sarah Cooper was not one to surrender easily. She rose to her feet, adjusting the small satchel she had managed to grab before being forced out of the wagon. Inside were a small knife, a handkerchief, and a brooch that had belonged to her mother. Not much to survive on, but better than nothing. "East," she murmured to herself, orienting by the position of the sun. "There should be a trading post about a day's walk from here. William had mentioned it once during a patrol. If she could reach it before nightfall, she might have a chance." The heat was relentless as Sarah trudged through the sand, her boots filling with it as she walked. Every step became heavier than the last, and her thoughts drifted to the water she no longer had. By midday, her vision had begun to blur, and her steps faltered. She stumbled, falling to her knees. "Get up," she commanded herself. "Get up, Sarah." But her body refused to obey, the strength seeping from her limbs as quickly as the moisture evaporated from her skin. As she slumped forward, her consciousness fading, Sarah thought she heard the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. A hallucination, she told herself. The desert playing tricks on her mind, yet the sound grew louder, more distinct. With the last of her strength, Sarah lifted her head to see a figure on horseback approaching, silhouetted against the bright sky. The rider was tall, powerfully built, and moved with a grace that suggested he was at one with his mount. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. He wore traditional Comanche clothing, his long black hair tied back with a leather strip. His face was weathered by the sun and marked with the symbols of his tribe. This was a warrior, a man accustomed to the harsh realities of the frontier. He dismounted smoothly, approaching her with caution. Sarah tried to speak, but her parched throat produced only a raspy whisper. The man knelt beside her, producing a water skin from his belt. "Drink," he said in accented English, supporting her head as he held the water to her lips. Slowly, Sarah sipped gratefully, the cool water bringing immediate relief. As her senses returned, she studied the face of her rescuer. His eyes were dark and intelligent, assessing her condition with concern. "My name is Sarah Cooper," she managed to say once she had drunk enough to speak. "My husband, the sheriff of Willow Creek, he left me here to die." The man's expression hardened at the mention of the sheriff. "I am Nako," he replied. "The man you call sheriff has done much harm to my people." Sarah nodded weakly. "I know. I tried to stop him." That's why he ... She gestured at the empty desert around them. Nako helped her to her feet and led her to his horse. The trading post is too far for you now, he said. My people's camp is closer. You will be safe there until you regain your strength. As he lifted her onto his horse and mounted behind her, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She was putting her life in the hands of a man whose people had every reason to despise anyone associated with her husband. Yet there was something in Nako's steady presence that made her trust him. Why help me? She asked as they rode across the desert, the landscape changing subtly as Nako guided his horse along paths invisible to her eyes. The Great Spirit teaches that all life is connected, he replied after a moment of contemplation. Your husband breaks this connection with his cruelty. I will not do the same. As the horse carried them toward the distant mountains, Sarah leaned back against Nako's solid frame, finally allowing herself to rest. Whatever awaited her in the Comanche camp, it had to be better than the fate William had intended for her in the merciless desert. The Comanche camp appeared before them as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Sarah observed the settlement with curiosity, a dozen or so tipis arranged in a semicircle, smoke rising from cooking fires, and people moving about with purpose. Children played near the edge of the camp, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. When Nako rode in with Sarah, the activity paused momentarily as curious eyes turned toward them. Sarah felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over her, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the fact that she was the wife of a man who had wronged these people. They will not harm you, Nako assured her, sensing her tension. But they will have questions. He helped her dismount, steadying her as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The hours of riding had done little to ease the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. An older woman approached them, her face lined with age and wisdom. She spoke to Nako in their native language, her eyes occasionally shifting to Sarah with undisguised curiosity. This is Makia, our healer, Nako explained to Sarah. She will tend to your needs. Makia led Sarah to one of the smaller tipis, gesturing for her to enter. Inside, the space was simple but comfortable. Furs and woven blankets covered the ground, and a small fire burned in the center, its smoke rising through the opening at the top of the structure. The older woman worked silently, bringing water for Sarah to wash with and a salve for her sunburned skin. She examined Sarah's bruised cheek, murmuring words Sarah couldn't understand but whose sympathy was clear enough. Thank you, Sarah said, hoping her gratitude would transcend the language barrier. Makia nodded, a small smile softening her weathered features. She left briefly and returned with a simple dress made of soft leather, placing it beside Sarah before departing to give her privacy. As Sarah changed out of her tattered cotton dress, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed in a single day. That morning, she had been the sheriff's wife, living in a proper wooden house with all the trappings of frontier civilization. Now she was a refugee in a Comanche camp, dependent on the kindness of people her husband had persecuted. When she emerged from the tipi, the camp had gathered for the evening meal. Nako motioned for her to join him near one of the fires, where an older man sat with an air of authority. His face was deeply lined, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. This is Chief Tashunka, Nako said. He wishes to know why the wife of our enemy comes to our camp. Sarah sat cross-legged on the ground, accepting a bowl of stew that was passed to her. The rich aroma made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous day. Please tell him that I am no longer my husband's wife in any way that matters, she replied, meeting the chief's gaze directly. William Cooper is a cruel man who has abused his power. When I discovered evidence of his crimes against your people and tried to expose him, he abandoned me in the desert to die. Nako translated her words, his deep voice rising and falling with the cadence of the Comanche language. Chief Tashunka listened intently, his expression unchanging. What crimes do you speak of? The chief asked through Nako. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. 3 weeks ago, a Comanche family came to town to trade. William accused them of stealing from the general store. He had them imprisoned, but I found the items he claimed were stolen hidden in our own home. When I confronted him, he admitted that he had taken a bribe from a land developer who wanted the family's traditional hunting grounds. As Nako translated, murmurs spread through the gathered tribe members. Chief Tashunka's expression darkened. "Those were my son's family," he said, his voice heavy with restrained emotion. "They returned to us after their release, but the damage was done. Their reputation was tainted, and they lost valuable trading relationships with the townspeople." Sarah bowed her head in shame. "I'm deeply sorry for what my husband did. I tried to make it right, but I failed." The chief studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You show courage in facing us with the truth. You will stay with us until you are strong enough to continue your journey." "Thank you," Sarah said, relief washing over her, "but I have nowhere to go. William will claim I ran away or died in an accident. No one will question the sheriff's word." "Then you must find proof of his crimes," Nako suggested. "Something that even his badge cannot protect him from." Sarah considered this as she ate. The stew was rich and flavorful, warming her from the inside out. Around her, the Comanche people had returned to their meal, occasionally casting curious glances in her direction, but no longer showing the suspicion they had upon her arrival. After the meal, Nako invited Sarah to walk with him to the edge of the camp. The desert night had fallen, transforming the landscape into a silver-blue tableau under the light of the rising moon. Stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. "Your husband," Nako began, his voice low and thoughtful. "He is feared in Willow Creek?" "Respected by some, feared by most," Sarah replied. "He wasn't always like this. When we married, he spoke of justice and protecting the innocent. But power changed him, or perhaps it merely revealed who he truly was." Nako nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Power is like fire. It can warm a home or burn it to the ground, depending on the hands that wield it." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the night breeze cool against their skin. "There is a place," Nako said eventually, "a day's ride from here. A cave where your husband and his men sometimes meet with others' men with money and bad intentions. My scouts have watched them. Perhaps there you will find the proof you seek." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "You would help me confront him after what he's done to your people?" "Justice is not about vengeance," Nako replied, his gaze steady. "It is about restoring balance. If your husband's crimes are exposed, it might prevent harm to others, both my people and yours." Sarah considered his words, recognizing the wisdom in them. "When I'm stronger, will you take me to this cave?" "Yes," Nako agreed. "But first, you must heal. Makia says your body is weakened from the desert and from mistreatment before that." Sarah touched her bruised cheek self-consciously. William's temper grew worse over time. "A man who strikes his wife is no man at all," Nako said, his voice carrying an edge of controlled anger. "Among my people, such behavior would not be tolerated." As they walked back to the camp, Sarah found herself studying Nako with new interest. His strength was evident, not just in his physical presence, but in his quiet dignity and clear moral compass. It had been a long time since she had encountered a man whose power didn't corrupt him. That night, as she lay on the soft furs in Makia's tipi, listening to the night sounds of the camp, Sarah made a decision. She would not run from William or hide from his influence. With Nako's help, she would expose her husband's corruption and ensure he could never harm anyone again, Comanche or settler. For the first time since William had pushed her out into the desert, Sarah felt something other than fear and desperation. She felt purpose, and with it came a flicker of something she had almost forgotten: hope. 3 days passed in the Comanche camp, days of healing and preparation. Under Makia's care, Sarah's sunburns faded and her strength returned. The healer taught her which desert plants could provide water and which were edible, knowledge that might one day save her life. More surprisingly, Sarah found herself welcomed by the tribe, particularly by the women who invited her to join them in their daily tasks. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah stood beside Nako's horse, dressed in the practical leather clothing the Comanche women had given her. Her hair was braided back from her face, and a knife hung at her belt, a gift from Chief Tashunka himself. "Are you certain you wish to do this?" Nako asked as he adjusted the horse's saddle. "Once we begin this journey, there is no turning back." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "William must be stopped. Not just for what he did to me, but for all the others he's harmed and will continue to harm if no one stands against him." Nako studied her face for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw there. He mounted his horse with fluid grace, then reached down to help her up behind him. As they rode out of camp, several tribe members raised their hands in farewell. Sarah was touched by the gesture, by how quickly these people, who had every reason to distrust her, had accepted her presence among them. The journey to the cave took them through changing landscapes, from the open desert to rocky foothills where pinyon pines and juniper trees provided welcome shade. Nako pointed out landmarks as they traveled, teaching Sarah to read the subtle signs of the desert. "There," he said, pointing to a distant ridge as the sun began its descent. "The cave is at the base of that formation." They approached cautiously, Nako guiding his horse along a path that kept them hidden from any potential observers. When they were within half a mile of the ridge, he dismounted and helped Sarah down. "We go on foot from here," he explained, securing the horse in a small grove of trees. "Less chance of being seen." They moved silently through the rocky terrain, Nako leading the way with the sure-footedness of someone born to this land. As they drew closer to the cave, he signaled for Sarah to stop, pointing to fresh tracks in the soft earth. "Someone has been here recently," he whispered. "Perhaps today." Sarah felt her heart quicken. "Do you think it's William?" "The boot prints match those your husband's men usually leave," Nako confirmed. "But they are gone now. The tracks lead away from the cave." They approached the cave entrance, a dark opening in the red rock face, partially obscured by scrub brush. Nako produced a small torch from his pack and lit it, the flame casting flickering shadows as they ventured inside. The cave opened into a surprisingly large chamber. Evidence of recent human presence was scattered about the remains of a fire, empty whiskey bottles, and oddly, a desk and chair that seemed jarringly out of place in the rugged setting. "This is where they meet," Nako said, his voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "The men from the railroad company and others who pay your husband for favors." Sarah moved to the desk, her fingers trailing over its wooden surface. "William would never leave evidence just lying around," she murmured, more to herself than to Nako. "He's too careful for that." She began to search the desk methodically, checking each drawer. Most were empty, but in the bottom drawer, she found a false bottom that gave way under pressure. Beneath it lay a leather-bound ledger. "Nako," she called, excitement in her voice. "Look at this." The ledger contained detailed records of bribes paid, favors granted, and the names of everyone involved. William had documented everything, dates, amounts, and even the specific actions he had taken to help his benefactors. There were entries about framing innocent people, intimidating witnesses, and seizing land under false pretenses. "He kept records," Sarah said, disbelief coloring her voice. "Why would he do that?" "Insurance," Nako suggested. If his partners ever turned against him, he would have evidence to bring them down with him. Sarah flipped through the pages, her hands trembling slightly. "There's enough here to put William away for years. The territorial governor would have to act on this." As she continued reading, her expression darkened. "Look at this entry from last month. He's planning to lead a raid on your camp, claiming that stolen goods were hidden there. It's scheduled for next week." Nako's face hardened. "Then we must act quickly. Not just for justice, but to protect my people." Sarah closed the ledger and tucked it securely into her belt pouch. "We need to get this to Judge Parker in Fort Smith. He's known for being fair, even to Indians. If anyone will act on this evidence, it's him." They were about to leave when the sound of voices and approaching footsteps froze them in place. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized one of the voices, William. "Quick," Nako whispered, pulling her toward the back of the cave. "There must be another way out." They moved deeper into the darkness, Nako's torch providing just enough light to navigate by. The cave narrowed into a tunnel that twisted and turned, the sound of voices fading behind them. Just when Sarah began to fear they were trapped, the tunnel widened again, revealing a small opening partially hidden by fallen rocks. Nako extinguished the torch and moved the rocks aside carefully, allowing a shaft of late afternoon sunlight to penetrate the darkness. The opening was just large enough for them to squeeze through, emerging onto a narrow ledge overlooking a steep drop. "We can follow the ledge around to safer ground," Nako said, studying the path ahead. "Stay close to the wall and move slowly." They edged along the rock face, the ledge sometimes narrowing to barely the width of a foot. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the rock in front of her, refusing to look down at the drop that awaited any misstep. When they finally reached wider ground, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was too close," she said, her voice unsteady. Nako nodded, scanning the area for any sign they had been followed. "We need to move quickly now. Your husband will soon discover the ledger is missing." They made their way back to where Nako had left his horse, moving as fast as caution would allow. The sun was setting by the time they reached the animal, casting long shadows across the desert. "We cannot return to the camp," Nako said as he helped Sarah mount. "It would be the first place they look. We must ride for Fort Smith immediately." "That's at least a 3-day journey," Sarah protested. "And William will be right behind us once he discovers the ledger is gone." "Then we must make sure he does not catch us," Nako replied, swinging up behind her. "I know paths through these lands that your husband and his men would never find." As they rode into the gathering darkness, Sarah clutched the ledger against her chest. Its weight seemed to represent all the wrongs her husband had committed and all the lives that depended on her getting it to Judge Parker. Among those lives were now the Comanche who had taken her in when she had nothing. She glanced back at Nako, his profile strong against the darkening sky. In just a few days, this man had shown her more honor and courage than William had in years of marriage. Whatever happened next, Sarah knew she was no longer alone in her fight for justice. The journey to Fort Smith pushed both Sarah and Nako to their limits. They traveled primarily at night, when the desert air cooled and they were less likely to be spotted by William's search parties. During the day, they sought shelter in hidden canyons and caves, taking turns keeping watch while the others slept. By the morning of the 3rd day, they had reached the outskirts of Oklahoma Territory. Fort Smith lay just ahead, across the Arkansas River. They paused on a ridge overlooking the settlement, the American flag visible flying above the fort in the distance. "We've made it," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "Judge Parker's courthouse is inside the fort." Nako's expression remained guarded. "For you, perhaps. For me, entering a white settlement is dangerous, even more so a military fort." Sarah turned to face him fully, understanding dawning on her face. "You can't come with me, can you?" "It would be unwise," he confirmed. "A Comanche warrior arriving with the sheriff's wife would raise too many questions. Questions that might distract from the evidence you carry." Despite the logic of his words, Sarah felt a pang of disappointment. Over the past days, Nako's steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't realized she'd come to depend on. "What will you do?" she asked. "I will wait here until nightfall. If you have not returned by then, I will know you have succeeded and are safe within the fort's walls." Sarah shook her head. "No, that's not good enough. William and his men could still be searching these hills. It's not safe for you to wait alone." Nako's expression softened slightly. "I have survived in these lands for many seasons, Sarah Cooper. One day in the hills will not defeat me." She knew he was right, but the thought of parting from him still filled her with unease. There must be another way. After a moment's consideration, Nako reached into a small pouch at his belt and withdrew a carved wooden amulet on a leather cord. "This was made by my father," he said, placing it in her palm. "It carries the protection of my ancestors. When your task is complete, take it to the trading post at Broken Arrow Creek, 3 miles east of here. The trader there, Jonah, is a friend to my people. He will get word to me." Sarah closed her fingers around the amulet, its smooth surface warm against her skin. I'll return it to you myself, she promised. Once William is brought to justice. Nako helped her mount his horse one final time. The animal knows the way to the fort, he said. He will carry you safely. Before she could depart, Sarah reached down and grasped Nako's hand. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For saving my life, for believing in me, for everything. Our paths crossed for a reason, Nako replied, his dark eyes meeting hers. The Great Spirit does not make such connections without purpose. With those words, he stepped back and gave the horse a gentle slap on its flank. The animal set off down the ridge toward Fort Smith, carrying Sarah toward her confrontation with justice. The fort's gates loomed larger as she approached, soldiers visible on the walls above. Sarah straightened her back, trying to present a dignified appearance despite her travel-worn state. When she reached the gates, a young soldier stepped forward to block her path. "State your business, ma'am," he said, eyeing her unusual attire with suspicion. "My name is Sarah Cooper," she announced clearly. "I am the wife of Sheriff William Cooper of Willow Creek, and I need to see Judge Parker immediately on a matter of urgent justice." The soldier's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the judge's name. "Wait here, ma'am," he said before turning to confer with his superior. After a brief discussion, Sarah was escorted through the fort to the courthouse, a substantial wooden building at the center of the complex. Inside, the air was noticeably cooler, the hushed atmosphere speaking to the serious business conducted within its walls. She was led to an antechamber where a clerk informed her that Judge Parker was currently hearing a case, but would see her when court recessed. The wait seemed interminable, each minute stretching as Sarah imagined William and his men closing the distance behind her. Finally, the door opened, and a tall man with a stern countenance and penetrating eyes entered. Judge Isaac Parker had earned his nickname, the Hanging Judge, for his strict adherence to the law. But he was also known for his fairness. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority, "I understand you have traveled far to speak with me. Please, sit and tell me what brings the wife of Sheriff Cooper to my courtroom in such a state." Sarah took a deep breath and began her story, starting with her discovery of William's corruption and ending with her rescue by Nako and their recovery of the ledger. Throughout her account, Judge Parker listened intently, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. When she finished, she placed the ledger on his desk. "Everything is documented here, Your Honor. Names, dates, amounts." William kept meticulous records. Judge Parker opened the ledger and began to examine its contents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page he turned. After several minutes, he looked up at Sarah. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Cooper. If what you say is true, and this evidence suggests it is, your husband has betrayed his oath of office in the most egregious manner possible." "It's all true, Your Honor," Sarah affirmed. "And there's more. He's planning a raid on a peaceful Comanche camp on the pretext of recovering stolen goods. Innocent people will be hurt or killed if he isn't stopped." The judge closed the ledger with a decisive snap. "That will not happen," he stated firmly. "I am issuing warrants for the arrest of Sheriff Cooper and his deputies immediately. I'll dispatch U.S. Marshals to Willow Creek today." Relief washed over Sarah like a cool rain after a drought. "Thank you, Your Honor. You've shown remarkable courage, Mrs. Cooper," Judge Parker said, his stern demeanor softening slightly. "Not many would risk what you have for justice. You'll be provided accommodations here at the fort until this matter is resolved. For your own safety." Sarah nodded gratefully, then hesitated. "Your Honor, there is one more thing. The Comanche who saved me and helped bring this evidence to light, he risked everything to help me. His people need protection from retribution." Judge Parker considered this for a moment. "I'll include specific instructions in my orders to the marshals regarding the Comanche. They are to be left in peace." He paused, studying her face. "This Comanche warrior, Nako, you called him, he must be an exceptional man." "He is," Sarah replied simply. The following week passed in a blur of depositions and legal proceedings. Word reached Fort Smith that William and his primary deputies had been arrested without incident, caught completely off guard by the marshal's arrival. The evidence in the ledger, combined with Sarah's testimony, ensured that they would face trial for their crimes. On the 8th day after her arrival at Fort Smith, Sarah rode out to the trading post at Broken Arrow Creek. The trader, Jonah, was a weathered man with kind eyes who didn't ask questions when she gave him Nako's amulet. "I'll see he gets it," was all he said, tucking the carved wood into his pocket. Sarah had expected to return to the fort after delivering her message, but as she stepped outside the trading post, she found Nako waiting for her, seated atop his horse with a second mount beside him. "You came," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I told you our paths crossed for a reason," he replied, a rare smile warming his usually stoic features. "The news of your husband's arrest has spread through the territories. You have done a great thing, Sarah Cooper." "We did it together," she corrected him. "What happens now?" Nako gestured to the second horse. "That depends on you. My people would welcome you among them, if that is your wish. Or I can escort you wherever you choose to go." Sarah looked out at the open country stretching before them, then back at Nako. In his eyes, she saw something she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it: freedom, respect, and the promise of a new beginning. "Your people taught me more about justice and honor in a few days than I learned in all my years in Willow Creek," she said. "I would be honored to return with you if they'll have me." "They will," Nako assured her, extending his hand to help her mount the horse beside his. "And in time, perhaps you will teach us some of your ways as well. Together, we can build something new, something that honors both our traditions." As they rode away from the trading post, side by side now rather than one behind the other, Sarah felt the weight of her past falling away. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but one filled with possibility and hope. In the vast landscape of the American frontier, where conflict between settlers and indigenous peoples had brought so much suffering, their unlikely alliance represented something rare and precious, a bridge between worlds, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. And as they rode toward the distant mountains where the Comanche camp awaited, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not as the sheriff's abandoned wife, but as a woman who had found her own strength and her true home.